The story of the companion Abu Dujana in the Battle of Uhud. Abu Dujana is one of the brave companions who were famous for their bravery and courage in battles. In the Battle of Uhud, this companion presented a wonderful example of self-sacrifice and loyalty to the Prophet Muhammad. When the battle began, the Prophet Muhammad was carrying a sword and asked his companions, "Who will take this sword for its right?" Several companions stood up and asked to take it, but the Prophet did not give it to anyone until Abu Dujana said, "And what is its right, O Messenger of Allah?" The Prophet answered him, "To strike with it in the faces of the enemies until they bow." So Abu Dujana took the sword and tied a red headband on his head, which was known as a sign of readiness to fight to the death. Abu Dujana rushed into the battle fiercely, fighting the enemies and splitting their ranks, and he did not retreat in the face of any danger. He fought fiercely and forcefully with the sword of the Prophet, until he reached the heart of the Quraysh army, where the women of Quraysh were chanting slogans to encourage their men. At a certain moment, Abu Dujana found himself in front of Hind bint Utbah, the wife of Abu Sufyan and the leader of the women in the battle, and she was one of the most hated figures among the Muslims at that time. Although he could have killed her, he refrained from doing so out of respect for the ethics of Islam in not killing women, and continued on his way to fight the men of Quraysh. At another stage of the battle, when the fighting intensified and the Muslims began to be subjected to great pressure from the enemies after the archers disobeyed the orders of the Prophet and came down from the mountain, Abu Dujana protected the Prophet himself. He stood in front of the Prophet, receiving blows and arrows with his body so that the Prophet would not be harmed. He was severely wounded, but he continued to stand, protecting the Prophet with all courage and sacrifice. This great sacrifice made by Abu Dujana was one of the most prominent moments of the Battle of Uhud, which demonstrated the courage and devotion of the companions in protecting the Prophet and defending Islam, even if it cost them their lives. The story of Abu Dujana remains one of the most wonderful stories of sacrifice in Islam, as it combined courage, devotion, and dedication, and showed how the companions were willing to sacrifice their lives for the sake of their religion and their messenger. The story of Al-Bara bin Malik in the Battle of Yamama. Al-Bara bin Malik was one of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, Pbuh, and one of the bravest Muslims in the Ridda Wars. He was known for his extreme courage and his dedicated spirit in serving Islam. In the Battle of Yamama against the army of Musaylama the Liar, the Muslim army faced great challenges in storming the Garden of Death, a strong fortress in which Musaylama's army was fortified. This fortress was a major obstacle for the Muslims, as they were unable to break it due to the strong fortifications and the large number of enemies. When Al-Bara bin Malik noticed that the Muslims were retreating in front of the strength of Musaylama's army, he came up with a very bold idea and asked the Muslims to carry him on a large shield and raise him over the walls. He knew very well that entering the midst of the enemies alone would mean sacrificing his life, but he was ready to do so in order to support Islam and break the enemy's power. Indeed, the Muslims carried Al-Bara and threw him over the walls of the fortress. Once inside the fort, he began to fight with amazing courage, and thanks to his boldness and determination, he was able to open the door of the fort from the inside, allowing the Muslims to enter and defeat Musaylama's army. Despite his many wounds, Al-Bara survived that battle, and thanks to his sacrifice, the Muslims were able to break the siege of the Garden of Death and achieve victory in the Battle of Yamama. This great sacrifice was an example of dedication and courage in order to achieve victory for Islam. The story of Al-Bara bin Malik remains one of the most wonderful stories of self-sacrifice in the history of Islam, as he put his life on the line in order to save his Muslim brothers and achieves victory in a fateful battle.